Patriarchy.
It's that thing where society favours the menfolk, isn't it?
And it shows up in fiction a lot, because a lot of fiction, intentionally or otherwise, mirrors some aspect of the environment in which it was created. But today, we're not talking about fiction that critiques or examines patriarchal societal structures like, say, The Handmaid's Tale. We're talking about implied patriarchy. I first heard this term from Lindsay Ellis's great series about the Hobbit movies. An implied patriarchy is, well, it's what a lot of authors kind of fall into as a default. The fictional world favors men, but it's not on purpose. The societal consequences aren't a part of the narrative, the characters don't comment on it, and the people important to the story are usually men. If there are women or non-binary characters, the latter not being very common here, they usually fall into a small number of archetypes. The transgressive villain, the edgy loner, the one of the guys badass, the fair maiden, the token team member, or the fridge. Have you ever been enjoying a show and then just suddenly thought, hey, where are all the women? Or how come the people in power are all dudes? This is that feeling. There aren't any hard rules to what does or does not qualify here. I'm sure you could think of plenty of examples and exceptions. We're just going to look at one. Mirror's Edge. Part 1. Glass-Tinted Glasses. Mirror's Edge is a 2008 video game developed by DICE and published by EA. You play as Faith Connors, an underground courier or runner, and run, jump, climb, swing, jump, slide, fall, jump, crab walk, jump, roll, jump, zipline, jump, fall, and jump your way through a fictional surveillance state where all data and information is tracked and recorded by the corporate-controlled government. Enforced by brutal police who previously cracked down on a series of protests turned riots, killing Faith's mother and pushing her into a life on the edge. The Mirror's Edge. Yeah, it's a pretty convoluted way to get to the title, but you can't deny that it sounds cool. I started writing a detailed synopsis of the game's development and story, including some tangents about theme and character and rats, but this isn't really a deep dive analysis of Mirror's Edge, although maybe someday, and that kind of stuff is just outside the scope of this video. A condensed version of these outtakes is available on my Patreon. I also won't be talking about Catalyst or Exordium or the Flash game, but for now, a brief recap will suffice. While on a regular delivery, the city's police force, or Blues, fire at Faith unprovoked. She overhears police chatter about the murder of Robert Pope, friend of the Connors and mayoral candidate who sought to tone down some of the city's oppressive regulations. Her cop sister Kate is framed for the murder, and Faith sets out to investigate and clear her name. A tip from ex-runner Jackknife points her to the head of Pope's security, Travis Ropeburn Burfield, who was shot by the same assassin he hired to murder Pope and frame Kate. With the help of her handler, Mercury, and Kate's lieutenant, Miller, Faith discovers that private security firm Pirandello Kruger is responsible for both the frame-up and a new generation of runner-catching parkour cops, codenamed Project Icarus, so that they can take over city police duty from the Blues under the direction of incumbent Mayor Callahan. Faith unmasks the assassin as her runner colleague and friend Celeste, then saves Kate from Jackknife, who'd helped PK build Project Icarus, and that's where the story ends. It's really hard for me not to go into more detail, but we're staying focused. Let's run through that cast of characters. On the runner side, Faith Connors, a woman with Asian heritage whose mother was killed during a riot against the state, leaving her with a heavy grudge. Kate Connors, her sister, a good cop who is framed for murder and has to go on the run with Faith. Mercury. My point here was originally that the three main good guys are people of color and that the villains are not, but I'm no longer sure. Playing this game, I always thought of Mercury as unspecifically non-white, but in doing research for this video, it got murkier. His character model is never seen in-game, but this is what he looks like in the cutscenes, and then there's this concept art which doesn't match either of those, and he's voiced by Glenn Rage, but Miller is voiced by Joseph Meidel, and even the fan wiki avoids listing an ethnicity for him. And, well, look, this video isn't about systemic racism, but it does intersect with patriarchal structures, and I would be remiss not to mention it. Mercury, a guy who supports Faith and other runners from behind the scenes and is eventually killed trying to protect Kate. Miller, a police lieutenant originally at odds with Faith while trying to look out for his subordinate, who later teams up with her to stand up to a corrupt government and militarized security force. And Robert Pope, a white man murdered for hoping to dismantle or curtail the city's oppressive regime. And they're up against Jackknife, a smarmy, condescending ex-runner who claimed to be retired while secretly working with PK and some bigger fish to take down the runners. Callahan, the unseen and corrupt mayor of the city, aka the bigger fish. Ropeburn, a violent ex-wrestler chiefly concerned with his own self-interest. And Celeste, a blue-eyed, blonde-haired woman who betrays her fellow runners for the sake of living instead of surviving. There's also Drake, Krieg, and the janitor, but they don't have any lines and aren't important to the story, although the janitor is important in my heart. You might notice two patterns here. The bad guys in the story are all men, with the exception of Celeste, a white woman who appears to be your friend and seems to want to save you from the consequences of her own actions, but ultimately is out for herself and isn't all that bothered that she ruined your life. And two, the people in power in this story are all men, full stop. There are 3 women in Mirror's Edge, and none of them have any societal power. Faith is an outlaw, Kate is a cop discarded as a scapegoat at the first opportunity, and Celeste is a pawn of the government who dies as a result of her betrayal, according to some cut dialogue from Jackknife. Does this have any effect on the story? No, of course not. Faith is an action hero with only mild characterization, and you could freely change how any of the characters present without making a meaningful change to the game's plot. Instead, it's all in the implications. Remember what this video is supposed to be about? The scene where Faith confronts Ropeburn feels different when you frame it in the context of a patriarchal city. 125-pound Faith defeats this brick of a man not with a gun or with brute strength, and not even with her wits, but by using his own amazing bulk against him. A classic wrestler move, she is literally punching above her weight class. Celeste's desire to live and not just survive feels a little less sincere when you consider how, to accomplish that goal, she betrayed her best friend and everything they stood for the sake of a corrupt jackass's mayoral campaign. I mean, did she really think after the runners had all been shot or imprisoned that Callahan was going to set her up with a villa on the coast? I said I wasn't going to touch on material from outside the game, but I will note this. We know that Faith's mother died in the November riots, but the tie-in comic Exordium reveals that those protests were planned by Robert Pope, Austin Reynolds, and Abraham Connors, Faith's father. 3 white men set up protests against an oppressive regime that eventually led to the deaths of dozens, including Erica Connors, a woman of Asian descent and wife of one of the organizers. It also features Erica having an affair with Austin. The comic was written by a man. It's almost like the people running this society are doing a bad job. So, how did we get here? Part 2. Leap of Faith. The development of Mirror's Edge is an interesting story. It started in 2006 when DICE wanted to... No, we're not doing a deep dive. Look, here's the important parts. Mirror's Edge was a bottom-up game, meaning it started with a mechanical idea, a first-person game that wasn't focused on shooting, and had the story and setting filled in later. Mirror's Edge, however, is somewhat unique in this regard because of how much later the story and setting were filled in. There are differing accounts of how this happened and to what extent. When I first played the game, I heard, and let me emphasize, this is just poorly remembered internet hearsay, that everything was written after the levels were designed and polished, which is why the cutscenes are in an animated 2D style instead of a more traditional in-engine render. Meanwhile, this interview with DICE producer Nick Channon says the story was really important, and they did the cutscenes that way to create a contrast, which is a major theme in the plot and level design, and that much is definitely true. For the sake of this video, the important perspective is the writers. Rihanna Pratchett is a writer and journalist who's worked with Larian, Ninja Theory, Ubisoft, and more. As she describes it,
they had just designed the game with no narrative in mind. They weren't pretending that wasn't the case, but I don't think I realized how difficult that was going to be, because you're essentially working backwards and wrapping the story around existing gameplay.
Which explains why the story is so full of hanging threads and economical characterization. Even with Pratchett doing her best to add meaningful context to a bunch of levels where you run, jump, climb, swing, jump, slide, it doesn't really hold up to scrutiny. It's no narrative masterpiece, but frankly, it's a wonder that the story works as well as it does. It is a competently told thriller with a couple surprises up its sleeve and some unexpected nuance. And not only was the story crammed into the game late in development, but the story we got isn't even everything Pratchett wrote.
They decided to cut out all the level dialogue for Faith at the 11th hour, after it had been written and recorded. I think they felt it was too distracting to the player in a first-person perspective, which is okay as a decision, but it came right at the end, and it wasn't a script where you could just hack 40% out and it would still make sense.
This actually survives as a single line that was left in the last level.
I was too young to remember exactly how it Everybody said the changes were for the greater good. But good isn't the same as right.
Anyway, why does this matter? Like most civilized people, Pratchett is a feminist. As she says about Lara Croft in the rebooted Tomb Raider series, for which Pratchett was the lead writer,
a female story or a female character is sometimes seen as being inherently feminist. Somehow just being female makes it feminist. I do absolutely consider myself a feminist, but what I particularly like in stories is just women getting things done.
And above all else, Faith gets things done. Faith, as a character, was born from the traumatic death of her mother in a city where the only way to get ahead is seemingly to be a white man. She was pushed to the fringe of society, where she tries to make it a better place by acting against the state in subtle ways, while her sister was pushed into law enforcement, where she tries to make it a better place by protecting its citizens. And when her colleagues reveal themselves to be trigger-happy militants who never cared for her at all, Kate has no objection to leaving that behind and joining Faith on the edge. And while Kate is effectively damseled for the majority of the story, although she does prove to be able to handle herself off-screen when she makes her way to the hideout, Faith's lone legwork, with the help of some voices on the radio, uncovers a vast, city-wide conspiracy orchestrated by a rogues gallery of corrupt men, and not only does she live to tell the tale, but she does all that and saves her sister. Sure, Mercury dies, but he was the comic relief and the mentor. He knew what he signed up for. And Faith and Kate aren't established as long-estranged siblings who have to begrudgingly team up to solve the conspiracy of Pope's murder. They're distant, yeah, but they hug in their first meeting, and Faith agrees to help without Kate twisting her arm. Even though their shared experiences took them down different paths, they love and support each other, and when a whole city turns its ire on them, they stick together and weather the storm, and they come out on top. Literally. When it comes down to it, the story of Mirror's Edge wasn't planned, I don't think, as a critique of a seemingly omnipotent patriarchy where victories are fleeting because it wasn't really planned. It didn't have the time or resources to be a powerful feminist narrative about dismantling a corrupt system. Maybe it could have been, but it wasn't even really intended to be. And yet, partly because of the constraints that defined its story, it became one anyway. I mean, the city is still pretty much the same as it was before. Callahan is still mayor, and he's not going to give up the ghost and retire. Project Icarus still exists, and now Faith and Kate are public enemies number 1 and 2, and not without reason. Actually, thinking about it, this is not a very uplifting ending, despite what the music says. But they're together. And even if it's only for a moment, they won. Against a city that was built to work against them in every way, against corruption and betrayal and that smarmy smile, they punched up. And they won. I don't have any big revelatory conclusions to make about Mirror's Edge. It's what it is. I decided to replay it on a whim a few weeks ago and just found myself thinking, how come the people in power are all dudes? And that made me want to play again and keep a closer eye on the story and setting, and that made this. I guess it's not really an analysis, just more like something interesting I noticed. I hope you found it interesting too. Thanks for watching. I'm planning on making at least one video a month this year, for the rest of the year, at least. Some of them will be essays like this, and some won't. If you think I put good words together, subscribe to the channel for more. If you like this content, please appease the YouTube algorithm by engaging with the video, like, comment, all that jazz. Tell me what your favorite level in Mirror's Edge is, and if you're of a mind, consider buying me a coffee or supporting me on Patreon. All of the interviews I referenced are linked in the description, and special thanks to Moface for lending her voice to this video. I've worked with her before and hope to do so again. She makes all kinds of fun videos. You should go check out her channel and show her some love. I'll see you next time.